Hi everyone, Jason here from spiritualbabies.net, and you've joined us for the final chapter of the book of Jonah. We're joined by Rabbi Neely, who's graciously given his time and has led us successfully so far through the first 3 books of this. So we've been into the final chapter, chapter 4. We're just going to get straight in. Previously, in Jonah swallowed by a big fish, didn't want to be there, didn't want to do what he was going to do. The people repented, and God relented in the last line of chapter 3, which is kind of odd because of Jonah's actions at the beginning of 4. So we're starting line 1. Now it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was grieved, and he prayed to the Lord and said, "Please, O Lord, was this not my contention while I was still on my land? For this reason I had hastened to flee to Tarshish, but now I know that you are a gracious and merciful God, slow to anger, with much kindness and relenting of evil." So he kind of continues on in 3. Is there a worry then here that Jonah was worried that he'd roll in saying that you're all going to die because you did bad things, and then they repent, God says, "Oh, I won't destroy you all," and Jonah ends up looking like somebody that's spewing lies?
Right, so the commentators argue 2 different versions of this. One is the version you've just laid out, which is he's worried about being accused of being a false prophet. That he came, said this is what's going to happen, and then it doesn't happen. And he knew that it wouldn't happen because he knew God. He knew that God would be willing to forgive. And very interestingly here, he's quoting from the book of Exodus, when God himself reveals these attributes to Moses. This is clearly what the people of Israel, or at least the prophets of Israel, knew to be God's nature, and therefore could count on it. And so, yes, Jonah might be feeling humiliated here, that if you were just going to forgive them anyway, why did I have to go? On the other hand, there are other commentators who argue that it's not about him being upset that God is merciful, it's about him being upset about whom God is merciful to. That Jonah knew that God would be merciful even to the Assyrians. And Jonah, being a prophet, knew that that was not really in the long-term best interest of the people of Israel, or at least, I guess I should say more specifically, in the medium term, in best interest of the people of Israel. And so he's unhappy about God's mercy being given to somebody that is, in his mind, undeserving. In my personal opinion, the second interpretation fits the overall theme of the book better, and it fits the lesson that God tries to give Jonah at the end of chapter 4 more tightly. But there is good evidence for both positions.
Because you have that premise in the Tanakh and in Judaism that the son isn't responsible for the sins of the father, and the father is only kind of slightly responsible for the sins of the son. And so what happens generations down the line shouldn't necessarily be a reason to judge the people that live now.
Right. And the very famous midrash when Ishmael has been sent out by Abraham and he is dying of thirst. And there's a very famous midrash that says when the angels see that God is about to help him, that they say, but aren't the children of Ishmael going to be trouble for the children of Abraham, the children of Israel? And Abraham says, yes, but look at this child now. Do I judge him by what will come, or do I judge him by where he is? And the answer is to judge him where he is.
Lord, take now my soul from me, for my death is better than my life. I've had man flu, which had me feeling kind of like that, but he does sound kind of whiny. Was he that fearful of his life, or was he just that annoyed for being put in that position?
Well, Jonah is somebody with suicidal tendencies. He had to know when he was fleeing from God in the beginning that he was setting himself up for death. And certainly when the storm came, he didn't do anything to try and cause the storm to be abated. Instead, he killed himself. He said, "Throw me over." So the idea that, again, at the end of the book, there would be this resurgent or at least echo of his suicidal ideation is not that surprising. He's a little bit of a, as you said, a whiner, a drama queen. He is so unhappy that the world works the way it works, that God is the way God is, and really in his tantrum here, he represents everybody who has ever felt that God isn't fair because God keeps letting wicked people off the hook from what I think they should be getting. And that's the operative word there. It's, I think that if I were the judge of the world, I could do a better job because, boy, I'd throw the book at them. So if the world works like this, what's the point, is what Jonah is saying.
And the Lord said, are you deeply grieved? Now, it kind of takes a weird turn here because, so God says, are you deeply grieved? And Jonah had gone out of the city and had stationed himself up. I wonder why. I mean, is this saying that when this conversation took place, he had gone out of the city and had stationed himself on the city, and there he made himself a hut and sat under the shade of it so he could see what would happen, and then he said to God, take my soul from me? Or the other way around? Is it just kind of giving you, and then this happened, and now this is where we are in the story? Because it seems odd that he would, after seeing that the people repented and realizing that nothing was going to really happen to them now, why would he build a hut to see what would happen in the city?
Right. And most commentators, I think, agree with the idea that the first 4 lines are a summary of what chapter 4 is going to be about. And then from 5 onwards are the details.
Oh, okay, like Genesis 1 and 2. You
Exactly.
get the same story, but twice. Right.
Right, so Jonah's really upset about this because God is compassionate and he would rather die, and God's like, are you sure? And here's how that plays out.
And now the Lord God appointed a kikayon, I hope. Do we know what that is in today's language?
It's nothing that I could ever point to. The various identifications I've seen in English, like the, the Ricinus? I don't even know how to pronounce it in English. I could not tell you what that plant looked like. Kikayon is the Hebrew, and it's just usually easier because, we're not 100% sure exactly which plant this is, and it's not really 100% germane to the story.
It grew up over Jonah to be a shade for his head and to save him from his discomfort, and Jonah was overjoyed with the kikayon. Now, another question. Why is the plant so prevalent? And I'll admit, I've gone through Jonah before half a dozen times, and I've totally blew over the fact he made himself a hut. Now, if he has a hut, I don't know if anyone's bothered with this before. Why was the plant such a big deal? I mean, did you see? He's sitting in a hut. He's under the shade.
Right.
God gives him a plant. He's like, I mean, how does that even work?
Well, it works if you've ever tried to make a little lean-to, sitting on the hill. It's not exactly easy to get 100% shade. So this plant is supplementing what he has built, and it's better to have the plant than not. In fact, it is such an issue of whether or not you should build your booth under a plant that is one of the laws of building a sukkah, a booth, which is the word that's being translated as booth here for the holiday of Sukkot, that one is not allowed to build your sukkah under a tree. It has to be built under the sky. That is the sukkah that's providing the shade, not the tree. Because so what's happening here is the reverse. He built something for himself, and God is saying, I can do better than that. I can shelter you even better than what you have built, and let me take care of you.
You see, you turned that into something amazing when it was so mundane. Brilliant. Okay. Okay, so he's overjoyed with the kikayon, and God appointed a worm at the rise of dawn on the morrow. And the worm attacked the kikayon, and it withered. And it came to pass, when the sun shone, that God appointed a stilling east wind. And the sun beat on Jonah's head, and he fainted, and he begged to die. and he said, "My death is better than my life." I'm thinking Jonah was probably single.
And a careful reader will notice that this is the same phrase that was used before. When you beg for death, I would rather die than live, or however you want to translate that, in Tov Moti Mechayai, right? That he's saying, my death is better than my life.
So actually, going back to the plant thing, it just shows how important that extra piece of shade was, because he's still left with the thing that he created. But that there's just not enough in this instance. Just on a side note, Herodotus wrote a huge amount of chapters on the winds in Asia and the Far East, and they all had names, which is kind of interesting. So there'd be a specific name for a specific wind in a specific region at a specific type of day. And I'm curious now, if I went and had a look, whether there would be references to which wind this is. But that's just me going down the rabbit trail.
Well, I mean, you can do a little bit to identify, because, we have the idea that this is Ruach Kadim, that this is an easterly wind. And that's the bad direction for the wind in most of this part, because you're on the Mediterranean coast. I mean, not on the coast, but you are near the coast. And the coast is to your west. So when you want a cooling breeze, you want it to be blowing in from the sea. And that would be a western wind, and that would be the dominant wind that would usually come. But occasionally the winds will change direction, and the wind will blow from the east, which means it's blowing more from the deserts.
And the sun's beating on his head, so the sun's high, so we can assume this is kind of a midday wind. There's a lot. It's forensic science going on right now.
It's actually, this is something very familiar to me, because I grew up in San Diego. And in San Diego, we had coastal winds most of the time. But every now and then in the summer, the wind would change, and we get what we called a Santa Ana wind. And that wind would come in off the desert that was to the east of San Diego. And it would just bake the city instantly. 100 degrees and higher Fahrenheit. Temperatures were just week after week. It was horrible.
And God said to Jonah, "Are you very grieved?" Which is where we came in line 4, about the Kikayon. And he said, "I am very grieved, even to death." And the Lord God, adding words there. And the Lord said, "You took pity on the Kikayon, for which you did not toil, nor did you make it grow, which one night came into being, and the next night perished. Now should I not take pity on Nineveh, the great city, in which there are many, more than 120,000 people, who did not know their right hand from their left, and many beasts as well." So we've got to the kind of the crux now of the whole story.
Exactly. This is driving home a point that God is trying to make, and Jonah is still not quite there. What Jonah kind of understood midway through the story, the whole fish episode, was, he can see why people needed to be given a chance to see the light, that they might feel trapped, but he still doesn't understand kind of why God cares that people have this second chance. He knows he can have sympathy for them as a human, but why does God care about these people? I mean, it's just, if he were God, and that's really one of the underlying themes of Jonah's character, if he were God, he'd be above all this. He would not care about, these stupid humans that keep messing up. If you mess up, you get punished. And sure, it may not seem nice because maybe you were born into a bad city, you were born into a bad family, you were only taught wickedness, and that's what you've been raised with. And so it's not exactly like you had a fair start, but it's still, you did wickedness. So, bam. And why should God care any other way? Isn't God more concerned with getting rid of wickedness than he is about tending and growing wicked people into being good people? And this is where God is trying to drive that home with the message of saying, look, you cared about something that you didn't even grow, but just because it somehow tickled your fancy, it gave you a little pleasure, something about it made you happy, and when it was gone, you were miserable. Shouldn't I?
It does feel that the plant affected Jonah because it was Jonah's Jonah was the center of his world. The plant made it better. So when it's interesting when it says, you feel bad for the plant. I don't know if he felt as bad for the plant as much as he felt bad that he didn't have the plant anymore. And I think maybe the Nineveh thing is the same. It's really, how does this affect me, rather than how have I affected them? Because he could stand there and feel very self-righteous. He doesn't do that either. I saved 120,000 people from certain death by bringing this message. Probably would have made him feel quite good. Doesn't do that either. I wonder if a part of this message is seeing yourself as not the center of the universe. And as part of a bigger toolbox.
Right, and part of, there's also a very not so subtle criticism of Jonah and others who think like him, that he cared about the plant, as you said, because it was connected to him, it was giving him benefit, but he didn't care about the city. Right? These thousands and thousands of people, and Jonah was perfectly happy to just let them be wiped out. Because in some measure of his mind, they deserved it. And God is almost incredulous. He's like, look, you cared about a plant that you'd only seen for a day, but you didn't care about an entire city of people, of thousands of people, who don't deserve what they're getting because they don't even know their right from their left? How in the world can you justify that to yourself morally? And yet many people do. Many people only care about themselves. Their things that are directly of impact to themselves. I believe, and I apologize if I'm misquoting here, but I believe it was Adam Smith, as in the writer of Wealth of Nations, when he was talking about morality, that put a parable that if somebody had to contemplate the loss of their pinky compared to the loss of thousands and thousands of people in China, that they would be more distressed about their pinky than they would be about the thousands of people dying in China. Because this is my pinky, right? It's me, it's immediate. I want, but, 1,000 people around the world, what's that?
We see it every day, don't we, in social media and in the news? You see, you got elbowed in the chest when you were coming home on the bus because there wasn't much room on there. That ruins your whole night. And then 24 school kids get massacred, and the next day you're wondering what to have for breakfast. It's gone. The annoyance of the bus will be there for days. But I think it's part of the human condition, and it's very easy to fall into that trap. So we can't say he's a bad guy in this. He's just actually acting like most other people act.
Well, yes, but he is meant to be a prophet, right? He is meant to know God better than that. There's I happen to be a big fan of Weird Al Yankovic, and he has one of his own songs, not one of his parody songs, that's called "Why Does This Always Happen to Me?" And it's all about being self-centered. It begins with the first stanzas. I was watching TV and they interviewed with a report about a giant earthquake, 20,000 people dead. Why does this always happen to me? Because I was recording The Simpsons. And now I'm going to have to wait until they show it again before I can get a copy. It's like total missing of perspective. And Jonah is the same way, right? He cares about this plant more than he cares about a city full of people. And God is trying to say, just don't you get it? And I do believe as well the entire book of Jonah, by the way it is structured, is also meant to be a very important constant reminder and lesson to the Jewish people as a whole, which is, we are very good, more or less, at looking after our communities, at looking after the Jewish people globally, of trying to maintain a sense of nationhood despite the diaspora. And that was something that was also found in the ancient world. But that's not supposed to be the limit of our circle of concern. It's definitely meant to be at the heart. You begin with, understanding and concern for yourself. You grow that to your family. You grow that to your community. You grow that to the Jewish people around the world. And you also grow it to the rest of the world. That's the whole idea of if you can grow compassion and love in one pot. You can keep transplanting it into a larger and larger pot and make it grow bigger and bigger. And Jonah, and unfortunately many other people, seem to get stopped at a certain level of that growth, where their circle of concern becomes stunted. And God is simply highlighting that for Jonah in this passage to say, don't you understand that you have to think about more than just yourself? And that the message that God has for the world is for more than just you. And that's what a prophet is meant to understand. A prophet is not supposed to say, oh, it's nice that God has given me an opportunity to feel the particular closeness and insights that come from my prophetic gift. It is supposed to be, wow, I have a responsibility to share this with my nation and with the world. And that was where we began with Jonah, that he was not ready. He did not want to share this with anyone.
Before we sign off, the last line there in 11, can we expand on who do not know their right hand from their left, and many beasts as well? It's not often. In fact, I don't know if I can remember anywhere else outside of things which relate to animals which belong to Israel that beasts even get a mention. So is this, I'm sure this has been expounded on and unpacked and unfolded into meaning other extra things.
Well, actually, this should be ringing a little bit of a hearkening bell back to the story of Noah. That God does care what happens to the animals in the world. And God is trying to say, look, I'm not going to wipe out an entire city full of animals if I can avoid it. Because there is value in life in general. And that is an underlying philosophy that comes over and over. It doesn't mean that we have to be vegetarian, but it does mean that we have to show consideration and certainly avoid wanton destruction of animal life. And that God is trying to say, look, even if you didn't care about the people, which, again, going back to at least one version of why he was reluctant to help Nineveh, as they were enemies of Israel or would be enemies, you should at least not want the innocent animals within the city to be killed because of their crimes. The commentators, by the way, in the story of Noah had to go through great lengths to try and explain that the animals of the world had also become corrupted and wicked in order to try and justify the destruction of all but a few of each species.
That's an interesting thing, isn't it? But that's probably something for another show. But that will, yeah. Right. Well, I think we're done. Is there anything you wanted to add there before we sign off?
I think we did a pretty good summary.
Well, thank you very much again for your time.
Always my pleasure.
And you guys at home, we have done many other videos. There'll be a playlist for Rabbi Neely up on the screen. It's that way. And then under that will be a link to the Rabbi's channel. You can go to his channel and you'll find a load of stuff on the weekly Torah portion and on the Mishnah and loads of other things. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.